Frustration mounts. Trust fades. What happens when your partner ignores your boundaries, and the conflict turns into a struggle for control? My boyfriend refuses to let me sleep in on weekends, says I'm overreacting. I'm 32 years old, and my boyfriend Mark is 34. We've been together for almost 2 years, and he moved in with me this January. Our relationship has been full of love and shared experiences, but like any couple, we have our differences. One of the most prominent differences is our sleeping habits. I've always been someone who cherishes my sleep, especially on weekends. During the work week, I wake up at 7 a.m. to get ready for my job. However, weekends are my sanctuary, a time when I can catch up on rest and enjoy a leisurely start to my day. I usually sleep in until around 9:30, rarely pushing it to 10 a.m., and it's almost unheard of for me to sleep any later than that. For me, sleeping in is a rare luxury, a way to recharge and unwind from the week's stresses. Mark, on the other hand, is the quintessential morning person. Regardless of the day, he's up at 7 a.m., bright-eyed, and ready to start his day. This difference in our morning routines was a point of mild contention early in our relationship, so it wasn't anything serious, more of a light-hearted acknowledgement that one of the chmas loved the mornings, and the other did not. When Mark moved in with me, I thought we'd find a balance. I made it clear that I'm happy to wake up early for planned activities. If he suggests grabbing breakfast at 9 a.m., I'll set my alarm for 8 a.m. without complaint. I'm only keen on sleeping in when there are no plans, which happens maybe 2 or 3 times a month. Despite this understanding, Mark has a habit of waking me up early even on the days I've set aside for extra sleep. It started with what seemed like small, considerate gestures. On days when we had plans, he'd wake me up earlier than necessary. For example, if we were meeting friends at 11 a.m., he'd wake me up at 8:50, even though we were only 15 minutes away from the meeting place. Or he'd come in and wake me up at 9 a.m. to help unload groceries, even if he had only picked up a few items. Sometimes he'd wake me up to take our dogs to the park, insisting that it was time to get moving, even though I'd planned to wake up 15 minutes later. Every time I'd get irritated and ask why he couldn't trust me to get up on my own. I reassured him that I was responsible enough to set an alarm and wake up in time for our plans. His reasons were always varied and often seemed unnecessary, leading me to feel increasingly frustrated. I started to wonder if there was a deeper reason behind his behavior, something more intentional and perhaps even manipulative. During the week, our lives follow a predictable rhythm. I wake up at 7 a.m., groggy but ready to tackle the day ahead. My job demands punctuality, and I've become accustomed to the early mornings. I have my routine down to a science. I wake up, take a quick shower, dress, and grab a light breakfast before heading out the door. Mark, meanwhile, is already up and buzzing around the apartment. His job allows for more flexibility, but his internal clock is unyielding. By the time I'm up, he's already finished his morning jog, showered, and is often halfway through a cup of coffee while reading the news. Despite our different morning tempos, we've found ways to coexist harmoniously during the week. Our mornings are a blend of quiet moments and brief interactions, with Mark often preparing a cup of coffee for me as I rush to get ready. It's our little routine, and while I'm envious of his morning energy, I appreciate the small gestures that make my mornings a bit easier. Weekends, however, are a different story. For me, weekends are sacred. I relish the thought of not having to wake up to an alarm, the luxury of rolling over and drifting back to sleep without a care in the world. Sleeping in until 9:30 or 10 a.m. is my way of recharging. These few extra hours of rest are crucial for my mental and physical well-being. They help me reset and face the new week with a renewed sense of energy and purpose. Mark, on the other hand, remains consistent. He's up at 7 a.m. even on weekends. Initially, this difference seemed trivial, just another quirk of our relationship. But as time went on, it became clear that our differing sleep schedules were more than just a minor incompatibility. Take, for instance, a typical Saturday. After a long week, I look forward to a leisurely morning. But Mark, with his boundless energy, has other plans. One Saturday, he decided we should meet friends for brunch at 11 a.m. The night before, I agreed and set my alarm for 8:30 a.m., giving myself plenty of time to wake up, get ready, and still enjoy a bit of a lie-in. Despite this, Mark woke me up at 8:50 a.m., a full 40 minutes before my alarm, insisting we needed to get going. Groggy and annoyed, I checked the clock and pointed out we had plenty of time. His response? Better to be ready early. Another weekend, Mark woke me up at 9 a.m. to help unload groceries. I had done the grocery shopping 2 days prior, and it seemed unnecessary for him to make a special trip for a dozen items. Nevertheless, he insisted I get up and help put them away. My frustration was palpable, but I complied, albeit grudgingly. His reasoning was always practical. but it felt like an invasion of my precious sleep time. One particularly irritating instance involved our dogs. We both love taking them to the park, and it's a routine we cherish. However, on a Sunday morning, Mark woke me up at 9:15 a.m. saying, "It's time to get moving, babe. We should take the dogs to the dog park." I had planned to wake up at 9:30 a.m., just 15 minutes later, but his insistence left me irritated. Why couldn't he wait those extra minutes? These instances started to pile up, each one chipping away at my patience. I had made it clear that I needed my sleep, that I would set my alarm and wake up in time for any plans we had, yet Mark's pattern of waking me up early continued unabated. And each time, I asked why he couldn't trust me to wake up on my own. His answers varied, but never seemed to justify the disruption. I tried different approaches to address the issue. I communicated my need for sleep more assertively, explaining how these interruptions were affecting my mood and well-being. I even asked if there was something deeper at play, perhaps anxiety about being late or a need for constant activity, but his responses remained superficial, focused on the immediate reasons for waking me up. As these wake-up calls became more frequent, my reactions grew more intense. What started as mild irritation turned into outright frustration. I began to dread the weekends, anticipating the inevitable disruption of my rest. Each early wake-up felt like a small betrayal, a disregard for my clearly stated needs and boundaries. This ongoing conflict over our sleep schedules was becoming more than just a minor annoyance. It was a source of tension that highlighted deeper issues in our relationship, issues that we would eventually need to confront if we were to move forward harmoniously. The early wake-up calls continued, each one adding a layer of frustration to our weekends. Despite my attempts to communicate my needs clearly, Mark's actions seemed to disregard my requests. Each instance felt like a small erosion of my personal time, making me increasingly resentful. One Saturday, we had plans to meet friends for brunch at 11 a.m. The night before, I explicitly told Mark that I would set my alarm for 8:30 a.m., giving us plenty of time to get ready and arrive at the restaurant. Despite this, I was jolted awake at 8:50 a.m. by Mark gently shaking my shoulder. "We'd better get going," he said. "We have to meet our friends at 11. Groggy and irritated, I glanced at the clock and pointed out that it was barely 9 a.m., and the restaurant was only 15 minutes away. "Why do we need to leave so early?" I asked, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Better to be ready early than rushing around," he replied with a shrug. Although his intentions seemed practical, the early wake-up felt unnecessary and intrusive, so I had been looking forward to those extra 40 minutes of sleep, and now they were gone. Our mood was soured for the rest of the morning, and our brunch with friends felt strained as I tried to mask my irritation. Another weekend, Mark decided to go grocery shopping early in the morning. I had done the shopping just 2 days prior, so there wasn't much we needed. Nevertheless, at 9 a.m., he was at my bedside gently nudging me awake. "Hey, can you get up and help me unload the groceries?" he asked. Still half asleep, I mumbled, "What groceries? I just went shopping." "I picked up a few things we needed," he replied, already heading to the kitchen. I dragged myself out of bed and went to help, only to find that he had bought a dozen items, none of which were urgent, so the frustration bubbled up again. "You couldn't wait until I got up on my own?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. "I thought it would be faster if we did it together," he said, as if that made perfect sense. Yet another time, on a peaceful Sunday morning, Mark woke me up at 9:15 a.m., insisting we take the dogs to the park. "So it's time to get moving, B," he said, patting my shoulder. "The dogs need their exercise." I had planned to wake up at 9:30 a.m., but those extra 15 minutes of sleep were precious to me. "Why can't we wait a little longer?" I asked, my voice tinged with frustration. "It's better to go early before the park gets crowded," he replied, seemingly oblivious to my annoyance. These incidents were becoming a pattern, and each time, my irritation grew. I tried to communicate my needs more clearly, telling Mark that I valued my sleep and would appreciate it if he let me wake up on my own. I reassured him that I was responsible enough to set an alarm and get up in time for our plans. Despite my efforts, the early wake-ups continued. One evening, I decided to address the issue head-on. "Mark, I need to talk to you about something that's been bothering me," I began, trying to keep my tone calm and non-confrontational. "I really appreciate that you want to spend time together and get things done, but waking me up early on weekends is starting to wear on me. I've asked you multiple times to let me sleep in when we don't have plans. Can we please find a way to compromise?" He listened, but his response was dismissive. "I'm just trying to be helpful," he said with a shrug. "I don't see what the big deal is. We get more done this way." Frustration boiled inside me. "It is a big deal to me," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I need that extra sleep to recharge. It's affecting my mood in our relationship." Mark seemed unconvinced. "I think you're overreacting," he said. "It's just an hour or so. You can't let that ruin your day." Feeling unheard and dismissed, I decided to drop the subject for the moment, hoping he would eventually understand my perspective. But the following weekend, the pattern repeated. After a busy week at work, I was looking forward to a relaxing Saturday morning. I told Mark the night before that I intended to sleep in, as we had no plans until the afternoon. He seemed to understand, or so I thought. At 9 a.m. I was once again woken up by Mark, this time gently flicking my nose. "Time to get going," he said cheerfully. "We should take advantage of the morning." That was the final straw, I snapped. "Mark, I've had enough," I exclaimed, tears welling up in my eyes. "I've told you over and over that I need my sleep. Why can't you respect that?" Taken aback by my outburst, Mark tried to defend himself. "I'm just trying to be productive and helpful," he said, his tone defensive. "You're overreacting to something small." "It's not small to me," I shot back. "You're disregarding my needs and making me feel like my boundaries don't matter." The argument escalated, with both of us raising our voices and airing our grievances. Mark accused me of being grumpy and ungrateful, while I accused him of being controlling and dismissive. The tension that had been building for months finally erupted, leaving both of us emotionally drained. After the heated exchange, I retreated to the bathroom, tears streaming down my face. So I felt exhausted, not just from the lack of sleep, but from the constant battle to have my needs respected. When I came down an hour later, Mark tried to downplay the situation, suggesting that my reaction was childish and that I needed to calm down. His words stung, deepening the rift between us. "You need to really think about why you do this and come talk to me when you're ready," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. We managed to get through the rest of the day, hosting our Mother's Day lunch with a facade of normalcy. But the underlying tension was palpable, and Mark's avoidance of any real conversation only added to my frustration. The unresolved conflict cast a shadow over our interactions, making me question the foundation of our relationship. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's actions were more than just inconsiderate. I began to wonder if there was a deeper, more manipulative intent behind his behavior. Was he trying to control me, to dictate how I spent my time? Or was it simply a case of mismatched priorities and a lack of understanding? As I mulled over these questions, I knew that we needed to address the issue head-on. Our relationship was at a crossroads, and we couldn't move forward without finding a resolution that respected both of our needs. It was time for a serious conversation, one that would determine the future of our relationship. The lead up to Mother's Day was a whirlwind of activity. I had spent most of Saturday cleaning the house from top to bottom, making sure everything was spotless for the lunch we were hosting for both our mothers. It was important to me that the day went smoothly, and I wanted to show our moms how much we appreciated them. In addition to cleaning, I spent hours in the kitchen, prepping food so that on Sunday, all we had to do was pop the dishes in the oven. By the time Saturday evening rolled around, I was exhausted but satisfied with the work I'd done. As we settled into bed that night, I expressed my relief to Mark. "I'm so glad everything is ready for tomorrow," I said with a tired smile. "I can't wait to sleep in until 10. It's going to be so nice to finally get some rest." Mark seemed to understand, nodding in agreement. "Totally," he said, which reassured me that he wouldn't disturb my much-needed sleep. Sunday morning arrived, and I was deep in a restful slumber, enjoying the rare luxury of a worry-free morning. But my peace was shattered when I felt a gentle but insistent flick on my nose. Groggily opening my eyes, I saw Mark leaning over me, a cheerful expression on his face. "Time to get going," he said, his voice far too chipper for the early hour. "We have people coming today." I glanced at the clock. It was 9 a.m. My heart sank, and a wave of frustration washed over me. "Why did you wake me up?" I asked, struggling to keep the irritation out of my voice. "I told you, I wanted to sleep until 10. "We need to start getting ready," he replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The moms are coming over." "We have plenty of time," I insisted, my voice rising with each word. "So I already did all the prep yesterday. We just need to put the food in the oven." Mark seemed unfazed. "So I thought it would be better to get an early start," he said casually. That's when I lost it. So the exhaustion and the repeated disregard for my needs collided, and I felt a surge of anger and hurt. Tears began to well up in my eyes as I struggled to contain my emotions. "Why can't you just let me sleep?" I cried. "I've told you so many times how important it is to me. Why don't you respect that?" Mark looked taken aback by my outburst. "You can't act like this because you didn't get an extra hour of sleep," he said, his tone dismissive. "So that's childish." His words felt like a slap in the face. I felt my frustration and hurt intensify, and I couldn't hold back the tears. "So it's not just about the sleep," I said, my voice shaking. "It's about you ignoring my needs and waking me up for no good reason. It's about not feeling heard or respected in our own home." Seeing that the conversation was only escalating, I retreated to the bathroom, needing some space to calm down and collect myself. The tears flowed freely as I sat on the edge of the bathtub, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and exhaustion. I stayed there for an hour, trying to compose myself before facing Mark again. When I finally came downstairs, the atmosphere was tense. Mark looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. "You really need to think about why you're so upset," he said. "It's just an hour of sleep." "It's not just an hour," I snapped. It's every single weekend. It's the constant disregard for what I need. It's you waking me up for things that could wait. It's the fact that you think my feelings are childish and don't matter." Mark's response was to shrug, which only fueled my frustration. "I think you're overreacting," he said. "I'm trying to be helpful. We have a busy day, and it's better to be up and ready." His dismissiveness made me feel even more isolated and misunderstood. "Helpful?" I repeated, incredulous. "How is waking me up early helpful?" "I told you last night I needed this sleep. You said you understood, but you woke me up anyway. It's like you're doing it on purpose." "I'm not doing it on purpose," he retorted. "I just think it's better to get a head start on the day. You always seem to take forever to get ready." The comment felt like another blow. "So, this is about you thinking I'm not efficient enough?" I asked, my voice rising. "So this is about you trying to control how I spend my mornings?" Mark sighed, clearly exasperated. "No, it's not about control. I just want to make sure we're on track. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be." "I'm making it a big deal. Because it is a big deal to me," I insisted. "You keep dismissing my feelings and needs. This isn't just about sleep. It's about respect and consideration in our relationship." Mark fell silent, and I could see he was struggling to understand my perspective. "I think we need to take a step back and really think about what's happening here," I said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "We can't keep having the same argument. It's tearing us apart." We managed to get through the Mother's Day lunch, putting on a facade of normalcy for the sake of our mothers. But the underlying tension was palpable. Every interaction felt strained, and the unspoken conflict hung over us like a dark cloud. In the days that followed, Mark avoided any real conversation about what had happened. His avoidance only deepened my feelings of frustration and isolation. I began to question whether this was a pattern of behavior that would continue, whether he truly couldn't see how his actions were affecting me, or whether there was a more manipulative intent behind his disregard for my needs. As I reflected on our relationship, I couldn't shake the feeling that this issue was more than just about our differing sleep schedules. It was about respect, boundaries, and communication. And it was becoming increasingly clear that if we didn't address these deeper issues, our relationship might not survive the strain. The days following our explosive argument on Mother's Day were marked by a palpable tension and awkwardness between Mark and me. We moved around each other like strangers in our own home, the air thick with unresolved issues and unspoken words. Mark's avoidance was evident. He seemed to go out of his way to avoid any meaningful conversation about what had transpired. His usual attempts at casual banter felt forced and fell flat, and I found myself growing increasingly resentful of his unwillingness to address the elephant in the room. Mother's Day itself, a day that I had been looking forward to, was overshadowed by the lingering effects of our argument. As our mothers arrived, Mark and I put on our best smiles, determined not to let our personal conflict ruin the occasion. However, the tension was hard to disguise completely. Our interactions were stilted, the warmth and camaraderie we usually shared replaced by a strained politeness. So we served the lunch I had meticulously prepared the day before, each dish a reminder of the effort I had put into making the day special. Our mother seemed to sense that something was amiss, casting concerned glances our way. My mother, ever perceptive, pulled me aside at one point to ask if everything was okay. So I forced a smile and assured her that it was just a minor disagreement, not wanting to delve into the details and spoil the day further. Throughout the lunch, Mark and I exchanged minimal conversation, our words carefully chosen to avoid triggering another argument. For it was exhausting, maintaining the facade of normalcy when beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The usual joy and laughter that accompanied our family gatherings were notably absent, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that even our mother's attempts at light-hearted conversation couldn't fully dispel. After our mothers left, the silence in the house was deafening. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television, while Mark busied himself in the kitchen, cleaning up. The physical proximity did nothing to bridge the emotional distance between us. Each clatter of a dish or rustle of a plastic bag felt like an audible representation of the rift that had formed between us. In the days that followed, Mark's avoidance continued. He immersed himself in work and his usual routines, making himself scarce around the house. I, on the other hand, found it increasingly difficult to focus on anything else. The unresolved tension gnawed at me, making it hard to concentrate at work or enjoy activities that usually brought me peace. Sleep, the very issue that had sparked our conflict, became elusive. I would lie awake at night, replaying the argument in my mind, trying to understand why Mark couldn't see how deeply his actions had affected me. We had several brief surface-level conversations, but none of them addressed the core issue. Each time I tried to broach the subject, Mark would deflect or minimize my concerns, insisting that I was overreacting. His dismissiveness only added fuel to the fire of my frustration. It felt as though he was deliberately ignoring my feelings, refusing to acknowledge the validity of my need for rest and respect for my boundaries. One evening, I decided to try once more to address the issue. I waited until we were both home and settled, hoping that a calm, uninterrupted setting would help facilitate a more productive conversation. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, my voice tinged with the exhaustion of the past few days. He sighed, clearly weary of the topic. "We've talked about this already, I don't know what else you want me to say. I want you to understand how this is affecting me, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. It's not just about the sleep. It's about feeling disrespected and unheard in our relationship. I need you to see that. Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. I get that you're upset, but I'm not trying to disrespect you. I just think you're making too big a deal out of this. The familiar refrain of dismissal cut through me like a knife. It is a big deal to me, I said, my voice rising. You keep saying you're trying to be helpful, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're ignoring my needs and disregarding what I've asked for. Maybe we just see things differently, he said with a shrug. I don't know how to make you see that I'm not doing this on purpose. His words felt like a wall between us, an impasse that we couldn't seem to overcome. The lack of resolution was suffocating, leaving me feeling more alone and unheard than ever. The ongoing discomfort seeped into every aspect of our daily lives, casting a shadow over what should have been a time of joy and connection. The ongoing tension between Mark and me was unbearable. One evening I decided it was time to address the issue head-on. Mark, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady but firm. This situation is affecting us both, and we can't keep avoiding it. He looked up from his phone, a hint of reluctance in his eyes. Okay, he said, putting the phone down. What do you want to talk about? Oh. I need you to understand how your actions have been making me feel, I began. When you wake me up early on weekends, despite me telling you that I need to sleep in, it feels like you're disregarding my needs and boundaries. I feel disrespected and unheard. Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'm not trying to disrespect you, he said. I just think it's important to start the day early and be productive. I'm doing it for us, not to upset you. But it is upsetting me, I countered, trying to keep my emotions in check. I need those extra hours of sleep to recharge. When you wake me up early, it feels like you don't trust me to manage my own time. Mark frowned. I get that you need sleep, but I just don't see why an hour here or there makes such a big difference. I thought we were a team, and I'm just trying to help us stay on track. It's more than just an hour of sleep, Mark. It's about feeling valued and respected. I need you to take my feelings seriously and stop dismissing them. Mark was silent for a moment, his expression conflicted. I guess I didn't realize it was affecting you this much, he admitted. I'll try to respect your need for sleep, but it might take some time to adjust. Feeling a mix of relief and lingering frustration, I nodded. I just want us to find a balance where both of us feel respected and heard. As the days turned into weeks, the unresolved tension continued to fester, a constant reminder of the growing divide between us. It became clear that, without a significant breakthrough in our communication and understanding, our relationship would remain mired in this painful stalemate. So myself at a crossroads, wondering how much longer we could continue like this, and what it would take to bridge the gap that had formed between us. So as the days passed, I found myself constantly reflecting on my relationship with Mark and his behavior. I loved him deeply, but his repeated disregard for my needs made me question whether his actions were intentional and manipulative. And was he genuinely trying to be helpful, or was there a deeper, more troubling reason behind his behavior? Such uncertainty gnawed at me, making it difficult to fully trust his intentions. I considered various possibilities. Perhaps Mark had an ingrained belief that productivity equaled worth, and he couldn't understand why I valued sleep so much. Maybe he was anxious about managing time and ensuring we never missed any plans, even at the cost of my rest. But the unsettling possibility remained that he was exerting control over me, dictating how I should spend my time and subtly undermining my autonomy. So this reflection led to an intense internal conflict. On one hand, I wanted to believe the best in Mark, trusting that his actions stemmed from a misguided sense of helpfulness rather than a desire to control. On the other hand, the pattern of behavior that made me feel disrespected and unheard could not be ignored. The lack of resolution and Mark's dismissive attitude towards my feelings only added to my frustration and confusion. After much soul-searching, I decided that I needed to address this issue head-on, with a clear plan for moving forward. I needed to set firm boundaries and communicate my needs more assertively. I resolved to have another serious conversation with Mark, emphasizing the impact his actions had on my well-being and our relationship. I would explain that my need for sleep was non-negotiable, and that we needed to find a compromise that respected both our needs. Moving forward, I committed to standing up for myself and ensuring that my voice was heard, while also being open to understanding Mark's perspective. If his behavior continued to disregard my needs, I knew I would need to reevaluate the relationship and consider whether it was truly healthy for me. So as the days passed, I found myself constantly reflecting on my relationship with Mark and his behavior. I loved him deeply, but his repeated disregard for my needs made me question whether his actions were intentional and manipulative. So was he genuinely trying to be helpful, or was there a deeper, more troubling reason behind his behavior? So this uncertainty gnawed at me, making it difficult to fully trust his intentions.
Crying over his mistakes, he says it's a misunderstanding. But when his boundaries violate yours, where do you draw the line? My boyfriend says coming in me is a boundary. What should I do? First of all, thank you all for the support. I tried to read almost every message and comment, but there were a lot, so it's hard. Some of you thought I was super naive, and I feel like I needed to just hear the truth straight up, and after posting and reading, I decided to end it pretty quickly. Just for some context, our relationship other than this situation honestly hasn't been great either. We're different races, and his parents don't accept me. He has strict Asian parents. Said he's extremely childish and immature, spends all day playing video games, and we do honestly constantly argue, so the only thing that was good about our relationship was the sex part, and now that that's gone, because of how he's acting, there's truly nothing good left in it. The plan was to break up with him as soon as he got home from work, and of course, today was the day that he was staying late at his job, and I just wanted to get things done and over with, because it was eating me up inside. When he finally got home, he just ignored me, and part of me just wanted to ignore him back and not deal with it, but I knew what needed to be done. So I went to our room where he had been since he got off work. He was playing video games, and I told him that we needed to talk, which he rolled his eyes at. You guys said to be as direct as possible, so I told him that I was breaking up with him because he's manipulative and childish. Immediately, you could see the change in his face from smug to scared. He asked if I was seriously going to throw everything away because of a disagreement, and I told him it was bigger than that. He said if I wanted to leave him because I can't fulfill his needs then to go right ahead. So I turned around to leave and he said, wait, this is where I lost it. All the last months boiled over and I said how manipulative and disgusting he was all because he couldn't come in me for a little while. That he was a child and if he couldn't figure out how wrong he was at 26, then there was no fixing him. I also told him how pathetic he was for putting on such a show by crying while watching porn just to try to make me feel bad. He said it wasn't a show, he just was upset that we were fighting all the time and he happened to be watching porn. He also doubled down by saying that coming in his woman is important and brought up his boundaries again. And I told him how much bullshit that is and that he can't set boundaries on my body. Though we were both crying a lot, he then admitted that he acted this way to deter me from taking out my ayod. After that, I left to go to my parents' house and he's tried calling and texting, all apologetic now, but I don't feel the need to ever talk to him again. Now to the next story 2. I just discovered my husband has been telling his coworkers I'm his sister. So what should I do? I need advice. Throwaway account because I don't use or understand Reddit, but I really need advice from someone not connected to me or my husband. But my husband, I'll call him Josh, and I have been together for 6 years, married for 4, and we don't have kids. We have a really healthy and communicative relationship. We're both pretty easygoing, and I really love him. He started working at a large accounting firm about 3 years ago, and from what he tells me, he loves it there. He's made a lot of friends through his job, and he goes out with them for drinks and social events quite often, and I've been totally okay with that. I'm quite introverted, so I've never been interested in meeting his colleagues or work friends, nor have I asked to. I've got my own circle of friends, and I'm fine with us having separate friend groups. After what happened yesterday, it only just occurred to me that he has never actually asked me if I'd like to meet any of them or go to one of his work events. I guess that's important context. Anyway, I'll start with what happened a few months ago that I had brushed off until now. I was at a bar with some friends for a couple of Friday after work drinks, and a guy approached me. He was there with some friends too. He looked slightly familiar, but I hadn't met him before. He seemed friendly enough, and he asked me my name, right? I think I must have just given him a confused look, because he followed up with, I'm Jake, I work Josh. I realized that I recognized him from some photos on my husband's phone. I don't use social media except for a private Instagram, so I'm not sure if he posted the photos anywhere. But we've got a very trusting relationship, so I look in his photos sometimes. Don't hate me. This is where it gets a bit embarrassing. I'm a bit socially awkward, and so I struggled to end the conversation, but he just kept talking at me. I guess he was already a couple of beers deep, but while he was talking, he said something like, it's great that you guys are still so close. I haven't talked to my brother in ages. At the time I was like, huh? But I just assumed he was drunk and not making sense, so I ignored it. So he started to get a little flirty, so I turned to my friends and we left shortly after that. I didn't say anything to them about it, and it didn't seem like a big deal to me. I also decided not to tell my husband that I had met his coworker Jake. Not to hide it, but because I figured the guy wouldn't even remember talking to me, and I didn't want to make it awkward for Josh at work by telling him his colleague tried to hit on me. I just thought no harm, no foul. But yesterday morning, I was out walking our dog, Monty. He's a cross between a few breeds and has very unique markings. This matters, I promise. And was on my way to my regular cafe, which is in town. I was waiting in line to order, and the guy in front was an older man. So he got his coffee and turned around, but stopped and looked at my dog and goes, hello, Monty. So Monty was super excited to see him, apparently, and so I guessed that the guy was another colleague of Josh's because Josh brings the dog to the office a couple of times a week. I thought it was sweet, to be honest, so I smiled at him and said hi. He introduced himself. I guessed correctly that he was a colleague, but then he said something like, aren't you a good sister, walking his dog for him. I was so confused that I didn't even know how to react at first, so I stumbled on my words and just said, it's my dog. I regret it, but I genuinely couldn't bring myself to correct him. and say that I'm Josh's wife and not his sister. It was just too awkward, and I just wanted to leave because I think was suddenly dawning on me what might have been going on. He asked me something about sharing a dog, but I was able to escape the conversation by being next in line to order my coffee, and he left. I seriously don't know what to do, because what the fuck? Do I even ask my husband about this? Part of me is just assuming or hoping that it's a mistake, that he doesn't talk about me much at work, and they assume we are related because we both have brown hair. But the thought that he has been telling his coworkers that I'm his sister, and evidently they have seen what I look like, so they must have seen photos, makes my stomach churn. I don't even know how I would broach the subject with him. I need some help. What would you guys do in this situation? I have only told one friend what happened because it's so weird and embarrassing, and she has jumped straight to time to plot his downfall because she's my ride or die. Love her, but I don't want to immediately assume the worst and or ruin my marriage over something that could be nothing. I'm sorry for the long and rambly post, but I would really appreciate any and all advice. Edit. Holy fuck. Thank you everyone who commented with some advice. I haven't read all of them, but I really appreciate the suggestions from you guys. A small update, Josh came home at about 2:30 a.m. last night, but he was drunk so he'd straight to sleep, which is fine by me because fuck having this conversation in that state. I've just woken up, but he's still sleeping. First thing I just want to clear up. I've seen a lot of people suggesting I have crippling social anxiety or am severely introverted, which I suppose you could glean from the way I explained what happened, but I'm not. I meant that I'm slightly introverted and that I'm not the most eager to meet lots of new people at once, especially a bunch of finance bros whose weekends consist of unending sports bar beers, where I assume I would be mansplained everything until my ears bleed. Prob a negative assumption, but I'm sure some of you know what I mean. I suppose you could say that I'm confrontation averse and that I'm quite laid back and prefer to keep a conversation easy and positive. IDEC. I don't like it when things are awkward and correcting when people misrecognize me as one of those things, but I'm not terrified of confrontation. So also my husband and I do share some mutual friends. I didn't explain that well, but our lives are not entirely separate. So the way he acts towards me around our mutual friends is extremely affectionate and normal. So it is only his work friends that I have never interacted with. I've also seen some people suggest that what is going on is equivalent to my husband beating me and me hopelessly wondering whether I should break up with him, or that I'm stupid for thinking my relationship was healthy when it clearly isn't. Like, damn, cut me some slack. I'm a real person, and this is an entirely alien and bizarre situation for me. My first reaction wasn't to assume the worst, but I do appreciate that you all have made me certain that it is a big deal. I guess I needed confirmation that the things that happened are enough proof that Josh has been purposefully lying, and they weren't just mix-ups. I'm going to talk to him today and ask him directly why he's telling his coworkers that I'm his sister. I followed the advice of writing my points down so that they don't get lost if I get emotional, LOL. I will do my best not to let him slither out of it, and I hope he has some proof that his colleagues know I'm his wife. I know that's not the theatrical confrontation you guys were hoping for, but it's a Saturday and I can't wait. So wish me luck. Thank you all. Update 1. Hi everyone. I just wanted to say thank you for overwhelming amount of support and advice. I'm blown away, and it really means a lot and has kept me grounded. I'm sorry for the slow update. I know a lot of you were interested in what happened. I actually tried to update on Saturday, but it turns out this subreddit doesn't allow me to post an update until 48 hours after my first post. I'm also only allowed to post one single update, so I'll try to fit as much as I can here. Sorry for how long it might end up getting him. I'll just get right into it. On Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than my husband. He was very hungover, so he was like sleeping a rock. But you guys will be proud of me because I followed some advice and decided to look through his phone properly while he was sleeping. I have been on his phone so often just pissing around on it that I had never thought to check anything very deeply. I know his passcode by heart. I checked all the expected things like Instagram DMs, Facebook Messenger, his iMessages, etc., and I didn't find anything that set off alarm bells to me. But I know from some comments that people who are cheating are good at covering their tracks and hiding messages, so I kept looking around. I saw he had a folder called Work, and so I looked in there, and he had a couple of Microsoft apps, Outlook, Authenticator, OneIt, etc., but he also had MS Teams. So I opened that up and had a look around. It did feel like I might have been breaking laws looking at his work messages, but I obviously had to. Anyway, I was already upset to see that he had a bunch of one-on-one chats with several female coworkers, which at first glance is obviously not an issue because everyone works with people of the opposite gender and are required to communicate with them. But a couple of them were vaguely flirty, nothing I would call egregious, but there would be the occasional message between them with some playful innuendo or a wink emoji. These upset me, obviously, and they did send me into a bit of a spiral, but I didn't find anything that suggested he was having an out-and-out affair with any of them. Still, I followed someone's suggestion of screenshotting messages, and I airdropped them to myself. I still wanted some evidence of the lie, though. Some proof of Josh telling someone that I was his sister directly. A commenter suggested that I go through his messages and search for keyword sister. I wanted to reply to your comment and say thank you for the idea, but the post was locked, so I couldn't, but thank you. So I searched for sis on his MS Teams, hoping to find results for both sister and sis. A bunch of messages from all hands group chats or one-on-one chats came up from other people, all unrelated and about their own sisters or whatever. But my heart dropped out my ass LOL when I saw there was a direct message from Jake, the guy from the bar, to Josh from a Monday a few months ago. Jake's messages said, "Ran into your sis at the bar on Fry. She's single, right?" And my husband had the fucking gall to reply, "Nah, she's married." I literally almost burst into flames on the spot when I saw that. I can't even describe how much I was shaking after reading those messages. Firstly, that I could have confronted Josh about this months ago, I was and still am, so furious with myself for that. Josh would have been fucking praying I didn't remember meeting Jake or that I wouldn't mention it, and he would have been counting his lucky stars that I never did. He probably thought he was hot shit for getting away with that, and I nearly burnt a hole through the floor thinking about it, LOL. But secondly, I was just in shock that he had the balls to tell this guy that I'm the one who is married because he doesn't want anyone having it on with me, but he is allowed to coyly flirt with every fucking woman in the office. Anyway, I kept going back through the search results on his MS Teams, and eventually I got as far back as 2-ish years ago, and I did in fact find a message from Josh himself to a group chat. It said me and sis in Nusa Dua. I clicked on that and saw that he had sent it alongside a bunch of photos of him and I from our holiday to Bali. We went to Bali for our second anniversary. I thought he probably chose those photos because he's shirtless and had been working out, so he looked hot in all of them. I was in tears seeing all of this. Obviously, I took screenshots of those too and airdropped all of the screenshots to myself. Needless to say, I was devastated and still am to see all of that. I am still struggling to even process it at all. But that all happened on Saturday morning, and I immediately took myself to my friend's house. I'll call her Sophie. I went to her place to cry it out and show her what I found, and she was extremely supportive and probably more furious than me, LOL. At around 1:30 p.m., I got a phone call from Josh, and I hung it up immediately. So he sent me a few messages along the lines of, "Where are you, baby? I'm ordering food, want some? Sad to not wake up next to you this morning. Guys, I have to reiterate how much I love this man and how fucking heart-wrenching it was to see him still acting like on had gone wrong. It took so much willpower to not just pretend none of it had ever happened and go home to him. I know a lot of you will yell at me or accuse me of being terrified of confronting him about this, which is not true. Please have some empathy. It takes me time to process my emotions, and I wouldn't have even been able to form a sentence if I tried to confront him immediately after seeing those messages. I needed some time away with Sophie to recollect myself, and so I stayed the night at her place. She ordered us tiny, and she helped me plan how I would confront him. I got a bunch more texts and calls from him as the evening progressed, and I eventually put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Sunday morning, I woke up feeling more angry than sad, so I opened my phone and finally replied to his messages. "Coming home now, need to talk." I kept it cryptic to make him squirm, to be honest. Because I was fraught with emotions, I can't remember the entire conversation word for word, but I'll try to replay it as best I can. The long story short, I got home and he tried to hug me, but I refused him and we just stood in the kitchen. I did confront him like someone suggested. I just said, "Why have you been telling your coworkers I'm your sister?" I wish it would have been like a movie scene where the color drained from his face, or he immediately looked like a deer in headlights, but he didn't. It was like he had been girding himself for this confrontation for a while because he just frowned at me and looked flabbergasted. He just said, "Huh?" This made me so angry. How are you going to pretend to be stupid after 3 years of lying? I basically said, "Don't play fucking dumb. 2 of your coworkers have greeted me as your sister and I have proof of you telling them. And I know you're pretending to be single." Essentially, I asked him what he had to say for himself. He still played stupid. He became moderately defensive and just kept saying, "I don't know what you're talking about," or "Why would I lie about you?" I cannot describe how furious I was at this point, but I was in tears. I always cry when I'm angry, so he was trying to comfort me as if I was having some kind of irrational breakdown. I showed him the screenshot of his message saying me and sis, and I said something like, "You tell me." He just said, "I don't know what I'm looking at and I'm confused." I got so angry that I left again and went back to Sophie's because it felt like a dead-end road. So I didn't think I was going to get him to admit to anything, and I was just getting so furious I couldn't continue. He was really upset and in tears, which to me was evidence that he knew he was lying and that he was going to have to come up with some explanation. He tried to get me to stay, but I told him that until you have something to say for yourself, we've got nothing to talk about. At like 8:30-ish, he called me again and I did pick up. He basically asked for us to talk, and he said he has some things to say. So I went back to our apartment. He had written out a bunch of stuff on a piece of paper as if he had prepared a speech and sat me down on the couch. So he asked me not to say anything while he was explaining himself. I'll write down the gist of what he said in bullet points. He started by apologizing relentlessly and admitting that he pretended to be stupid before because he couldn't immediately think of something to say for himself. He said that immediately after he started at his job, he realized the atmosphere was like a frat house. All of his team members were men in their 20s and 30s that were single and fuckboys. His word. He noticed that the one guy in their team that was married would either get picked on or essentially excluded from any and all social interactions that included getting lunch, inside jokes, going out on Friday, etc. So these guys were friendly and welcoming to Josh, and he admitted that he was desperate to fit in with them. He hated feeling like fresh meat. So he was scared that saying he was married would alienate him from his coworkers, and at first just never mentioned that he was married. So he said he did wear his wedding ring, and that they had just never pointed it out. A few months in, they were all out drinking after work. He admitted that after one of his workmates saw a picture of him and I on his lock screen, they asked him who I was, and in a moment of panic he said, "My sister." He was really apologetic at this point, and he was crying a lot. He couldn't even look at me, and he was just reading what he had written down. Anyway, he said that from then, he basically dug himself a deeper and deeper grave because they kept grilling him about me and wanting to see more pictures of me. So he said he had let it go on too long and that he didn't have the balls to admit to the lie. They would always bring me up and ask shit like, "Did you give her my number yet?" or joke that they had slept with me, etc. So when he got that message from Jake, he essentially thought it was just him taking the piss, but he didn't like the jokes they were making about me and said that I was married in hopes they would stop. They didn't. So he said that this wasn't the first time he told them I was married. In fact, he had said so pretty much immediately after saying I was his sister. He said that those pictures of us in Nusa Dua were the only pictures that he had purposefully sent them and deliberately lied about after what he called an endless barrage of pestering from his colleagues to share the pics from his holiday. So he said he was really ashamed that he did that. So he told me that he had never had an affair or even considered it, that the messages between him and his female colleagues were banter, and that it was commonplace to talk to people like that in the office. He also said he knows how disgusting it is, and he is embarrassed to have been acting like a fuckboy. Again, his word. He concluded his speech by apologizing again, and said that he was disgusted with himself and ashamed that he had lied for so long, but felt like he had trapped himself and that he couldn't find a way to get himself out of it. He said he knows he could have confessed the truth to either his coworkers or to me at any point, but that he didn't because he was a coward. So he said that he'll confess to his entire office that he lied and that I am his wife and not his sister if I want him to. He said that he will quit his job without a word if it would make me feel better, and that he hopes I can forgive him if I can. Anyway, I couldn't really think of anything to say at that point. He went to lock himself in the bathroom and I just sat on the couch crying. I still don't know if I can trust what he said, and a lie that extreme is just baffling to me. If he can lie like that for so long, what else could he be lying about? But his explanation and apology seemed so sincere and genuine, and I guess to an extent what he said is believable. He has always been extroverted, but very susceptible to peer pressure, especially from other blokes. If nothing else, to me, it's a sign of shocking immaturity. Anyway, I packed a bag and went back to Sophie's, and I'm still at her place as I'm writing this. She said I can stay as long as I need to. So it just that I needed time away from him to think about everything, and whether or not I believe him, or whether I can ever trust him again. So he told me to take as long as I needed, and that he will still be there if or when I get back, he said, even if it takes a year. Right now, nothing feels real. I'm still dealing with the emotional whiplash from all of this, and I can't keep food down or think about anything. I've taken the day off work, and Josh told me he's going to take off the whole week. Sophie and my other friends have told me not to make a decision on anything until my head is clear. I spoke to my parents this morning, and my mom says it's just a bump in the road, but she and my dad adore Josh, so they're pretty biased. LOL. That's where I am right now. I'll take some time before I consider my next steps. I can't say whether I'm leaning towards forgiveness or divorce, but those are really the only options. I kind of feel lost and avoid at the moment. That's probably the best way to describe it, just emptiness.